Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Portier with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the South Coast Artist Index and by Heavenly Spirits, premier importer of French spirits. As per usual, I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves. I'm going to ask you to give us your government name and then the name that you are more known by.
Government name, wow, it's Richard Walega, but most people just call me Richard. Back in the day, it was Dick, but that morphed into Richard. And here I am, retired from local and federal government, living in Florida, and I was happy to get in contact with you over Facebook, looking at all your art and listening to all your discussions about Portugal, because I'm half Portuguese and not from the mainland. My family's from Madeira. And Carolyn and I went there 2-3 years ago. And I can tell you, if I knew back when what I know now, I probably would have retired in Madeira. It's absolutely a gorgeous place.
Tell you the truth, yeah. Actually, I think the window kind of closed just around the pandemic, because when I was there, on my first visit, I mean things are still inexpensive, but once you get used to paying little, you don't want to pay more.
Exactly.
And I mean, you can get an entire house there for like $65,000. Yeah, that'd be an expensive one.
Yep.
You know,
we had a taxi driver who took us all day, all around the island. We did a complete 360 around the island, and then at the end, we visited his home and his dad. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was sitting on the hillside.
Yeah.
You know, it was not a palatial place, but it was very comfortable, very modern. I was just so impressed by everything on the island, especially the city of Funchal.
Yeah.
Carolyn didn't like it so much with all the hills and the narrow streets and stuff, but it really, really struck a chord with me. And I was glad to go because I wanted to see where my ancestors came from. And I have a much deeper appreciation for what they had to struggle with and what America means to immigrants. I mean, it just kind of must have been an amazingly difficult life when they were there, you know, because they were just farmers, they were peasants. And now you can get around the island very easily. Back then you couldn't. And it just was amazing to me how they might have met and how they survived, and then how they got over from Madeira to New Bedford. So it was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, my mom was born in Yonkers, and her family returned to the mainland. It's one thing I really want to check into, because it's happened with other ethnic groups. But during the Depression, they went back, and the very little they had here made them kings over there. And they went. They returned to a place called Caldas da Rainha, which I don't know what the connection was, because neither my grandmother or my grandfather, neither of which I ever had a chance to meet, neither one of them came from Caldas da Rainha. And what Caldas da Rainha is the Queen's hot baths. It's like the Furnas on the islands, you know, in the Azores. And my mom came back right after the war, and it's she came over on a freighter, and it's an interesting kind of a story that they all have to tell. And when I returned, when I went there to go visit, my brother, who lives in Germany, On the way, we stopped in Aubry. That's where our grandmother came from. It was a medieval fair in a 10th century medieval castle. you know, but the thing about there is, like, she would tell me these stories about, they would have what she called holes in the roof, in the ceiling, because the braza, the grill in the house. And
Yeah.
so they were grilling, and it was going up to the hole in the
Right up.
roof. And they had the indoor plumbing and all these other things. And so when I first went over in 2015, 2016, wow, Figueira da Foz, where my stepfather is from and where she lives now, is phenomenal. Phenomenal. I always said, the city fathers in New Bedford should go to Figueira da Foz, take a trip over there, a legal, modified government trip over there, and check them out.
Uh-huh.
Very, very similar in so many ways, and that's probably why the people from Figueira feel so comfortable here in New Bedford,
Uh-huh.
and many of them obviously are fishermen. We ran into each other like almost constantly for a while. Back in the late 70s, I worked for the Office of Historic Preservation under Tony Souza, the legendary Tony Souza.
Yeah. Yeah.
And best boss I ever had. I really have to say that, right? And when he sees one of us, he says, "Best crew I ever had." But we were involved in a windshield survey, the historic building survey, and we had to survey every building prior to 1920 in the entire city.
Wow. I didn't know that had happened.
Yeah.
That's a lot of surveying.
We had 4 or 5 teams.
Pardon me?
We had 4 or 5 teams, and all they did every day, 5 days a week, was go into this sector, so to speak, drive up and down every street. I wonder how many people probably thought they were narcos or something,
Right.
But you drive up and down every street, and then it would be like on impulse. We were trained by Maximilian Ferro, the guy.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow, this is a legendary name.
Yeah,
Max.
Yeah. Did he pass away?
I believe he did.
Yeah, he was a
I
neighbor.
believe so.
I lived on East Clinton Street, and he was
Uh-huh.
above Chancery. Yeah. We learned a lot from him. What's that?
I believe he converted a garage into a residence, and it was.
It was actually a stable.
Yeah.
So that was a really, really, really great job.
How long did it take to do the survey?
Oh my gosh, it had to have taken at least 2 years, because 2 of us left. One of the guys that I worked with, and who became a friend of mine and a friend of the family, George Butts. His family has a deep history. His father was the master of the hunt and all these other things, and his father was also the animal control officer, and he was also the George used to say that his father was the only horse soldier in the U.S. Coast Guard. During the war, I mean, that was one of his duties. They bring in the lifeboats, the surf boats, and these horses for them. And then I ran into a philosophical disagreement with my boss. I was the assistant office manager, and I wanted to do research on all of the mills. She was, I'll just say, she was from North Dakota. And she just didn't quite get it. And I said, look, I'm not an urban planner, but wherever you have a mill, okay, this is an epicenter. And look, wherever there's a mill, you're pretty much going to find a fire station. You're pretty much going to find a police station. You're pretty much going to find a school. You're pretty much going to find a main trunk of the trolley. You're going to have all these things, because now they created these neighborhoods. And that's when when George and his partner on the team, Robin Shields, who was a photographer, he and George tripped. I think it was a water department. I thought the man's name was Mr. Strahaska. It was a Polish last name. The office is the one that had the spiral staircase.
Yeah.
Wow. And he
Huh.
showed them, he was like one of those guys like, I'm so glad you came. I've been waiting. I've been waiting for somebody like you. And he showed them these incredible engineering drawings in
Yeah.
lithographs in color, showing all the steam lines and the electric running through, and
Wow.
when they were electrified. I mean, it was phenomenal. I mean, they were pieces of art themselves.
Sure.
And I ended up leaving and going to work on what was then the Fort Tabor Museum.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's when they had restored. Were you involved in that? When they restored the
No,
fort to that point, you know?
no, I was aware of it, but I wasn't really involved in it.
Okay. And then um, let's see. You know, there's a lot going. Oh, Peggy Medeiros, whom I've never
Yeah.
officially met, took my place. And it's always like, because of that, I'd like to talk to her about where her whole life went because of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Still
Was that?
incredible.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're dropping out a bit, so sometimes it's hard to tell if you stop speaking
Yeah.
or whatever. So you were a city planner
Yeah.
and
From
you worked
19,
with Stretch Dupree.
I knew Stretch. We were in different departments, but I
Okay,
knew him. Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
That name I remember. City Hall was a different place back then.
Oh, sure was. It sure was.
Yeah, I mean, I remember walking into the assessor's office, you know, because we had free reign. Our office was in the attic,
Oh, you're in the attic.
in the attic.
Wow.
And we had free reign, you know, walking to the assessor's office, going to the plat and lot, um,
Yeah.
index file. And it's amazing how much of the history they've thrown away.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Jack Markey did that sort of on a whim. I guess he went up there and he saw everything and, you know, this is a mess. We got to get rid of it. And people were like, oh my God, what are you doing? So many things that went that shouldn't have gone, but it was one of those impulse deals,
Yeah.
and anybody knew it was happening. That was part of the problem, and nobody really stopped it. It was a loss. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. One of the things that was up in the attic specifically were the fire reports, I think they called them.
Uh-huh.
And what was great about those is those were primary documentation of a dwelling,
Yeah.
you know, at an address, so on and so forth. So that all went. So
Yeah.
now people are probably wondering, what the hell is this guy doing on the artist index? Well, tell us about Carol, your wife, for a bit, just to give you legitimacy.
Give me.
Yeah.
Well, we went to high school together and went out briefly, and then we sort of parted ways. But she's been an artist as long as I've known her. In fact, the thing that I was beguiled with is the fact that we went to see Archibald MacLeish do a presentation that was sponsored by UMass. I guess at that time it was SMTI. And while we were listening to him, she was drawing him at the podium. So I was so struck by that at the end, I ran up and I'm you know, standing in the well and talking to him. I said, Mr. MacLeish, you should see what my girlfriend did, you know, and I showed him he was struck by it, and they were trying to get him to leave because he had another report. He says, I'm speaking to the students right now. Leave me alone. So we had a little discussion. Anyway, she's, as long as I've known her, she's been an artist, and she worked with Gallery X. And I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, we met again briefly and, you know, went our separate ways. And then for our 50th high school reunion, we got back together and said, hey, you know, we've been thinking about this long enough. Why don't we just get married and get it over with? So, but she's transplanted herself down here to Southwest Florida and is doing a lot of painting. She's doing a lot of work with different tropical plants, especially bananas, banana leaves. You know, some artists have done water lilies. She's doing banana plants. So it's and we've done quite a bit of running around trying to get her exposed to the region, trying to get her known.
Mhm.
It's tough because there are a lot of artists down here, and this area is Florida is totally different. You got to travel some to get around. It's a lot different than New England, but it's been fun. And her artwork is on the walls, and she's had shows. She's in a show, a virtual show, I guess, at Gallery X about flowers.
Yeah, I just saw her triptych that she
Yeah.
posted.
Yeah.
What was her maiden name, for the record?
Carolyn Strules was her name, and then she went by Carolyn DeLuey, which was her married name. She's had that for quite some time, and now she's taken on Carolyn Walega, the artist formerly known as Carolyn DeLuey. She goes crazy with putting this on the bottom corner of a painting, sort of like Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince. So,
well, it's really, really important. I belong to the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club, and it's a great, great group. My wife is from Detroit, and that's a whole other story for another day. But one of the discussions we had last week was they try to impress the younger artists specifically. Okay, your initials are JK. That's wonderful. When you're gone, and this shows up in the Salvation Army somewhere, so who is this? I have no idea.
yeah,
What I mean? So that's very important, because the provenance you just never really.
Oh, provenance is quite important.
Yeah, she was also a Swain graduate.
Yes, she was. She
Okay.
was. She went to the museum school for a year, and then ended up at Swain. And she also went to UMass Dartmouth and got a master's in teaching.
Okay.
So she's been around. She's been around the area. And the whole issue of UMass and fine arts, I mean, it has a lot to do with New Bedford's vibrancy as a art center now, because of what happened with Star Store, which I think sort of a seminal event in transforming the city into an art colony. And I don't think the transformation is complete. I think it's still ongoing, and probably been set back a little bit by the pandemic. But I think there's been enough energy instilled in the city that it'll prevail.
Let's roll it back a little bit.
Sure.
Swain is very, very important. In fact, Don Wilkinson, who is the art writer formerly known as the art reviewer, because he said, he's not going to review any artwork during pandemic time. If you can't see it, he's not going to review it.
Right.
So he's been doing a lot of profile stories. I was lucky to have one. He is going to be coming on board with the Artist Index to focus primarily on the Swain School. And he's going to it's a topical series. It's going to be called Push Pull, which is an artistic thing, part of the work process. So Carol has an opportunity to be both on this show and on Dawn's show as well. But rolling back to the Swain School of Art, the Swain School of Design, that if we were to frame this conversation as a three-legged stool, yes, the Swain was one of the legs. Okay, and I'm now wondering what's going to happen when the last Swainey, passes on, so to speak. How or will that legacy be passed on? That second leg is, yes, definitely the Star Store. I mean, CVPA, College of Visual and Performing Arts, which never existed when I went to SMU, Southeastern Massachusetts University, which followed Southeastern Massachusetts Institute for Technology.
Right.
Same place, different name.
Bedford Tech. Don't remember that.
Oh, I was just going to say, the CVPA started in off campus in Bedford Tech on Purchase Street. Right. And then, really, there was nothing up until through the mid 80s or whatever. I mean, Gallery X came along, a bunch of hippies from Swain. They opened up this cooperative, and it's like been going for 30 almost 40 years now. And working in your department with the city, you have an interesting um, perspective, because you saw the city as it was from a functional aspect
Yeah.
to where it's developed to, and maybe you could offer us a glimpse into what you think the future may be.
Well, I think the future is probably going to be a little more of a satellite city to Boston because of the rail, and that has good and bad elements to it. I think the good is the new energy and the access to opportunity and all of that, but we have to be careful about the housing market and what it could do to that. But I think that the city still has a number of issues that are out there that could affect it negatively. I think the issue of drugs and crime is still something it's been nagging at the city for quite some time, even when we were working in the city, and I think it's probably gotten worse.
Mhm.
And
Well,
so,
let me stop you just for a bit.
Sure.
And ask you about that. My thing is, and one of the things that really rattles me is that even politicians and government people, they all think that it's like the silver bullet. Like, oh, this George Rogers was former city councilman, former
right.
was famous for like thinking this is it. It's like the one thing. There is no one thing. I mean,
No.
screw goes into a piece of mechanics, and a bolt has got to hold it on, and it's connected to, and that's so. And I think the biggest problem was, and we had this discussion on Messenger. The biggest problem was, to use that term, it was white flight.
Yeah.
The development of the suburbs, the Portuguese, especially referring to Dartmouth as God's country.
Right.
They got, because for them it was coming up. I don't think it was about white flight like it was in major metro areas. It was, hey, I can have myself a really nice garden out there, not like this little postage stamp thing like on Colette Street or something. So now what happened was all that stock, the 3-decker, some of them rabbit runs, some of them 3 units, some of them 6 units, all that stock now started to get gobbled up by investors and shyster real estate guys, and Section 8's the way to go. So basically, it just became a bad. It was like a gerbil in a cage thing, the thing that they run around on. And then now they blamed the people who lived in now what was considered the low rent district. It wasn't there because as a kid, when my father was coming up, I mean, my parents were separated when I was not even a year old. So I lived with both of them. And seeing my dad, who was a mill worker, my God, how many places do we live in the city? I lived in the north end and south end. I mean, I lived all over the place. But the point being is that a majority of the places that we lived in, the tenement houses, the 3-deckers, were owner occupied. And that's the point. I think owner occupied is a solution, not the solution, a solution. You've got to bring back owner occupied. You've got to give owner occupied land owners a tax break of some sort, and they have to redevelop the neighborhoods, which don't exist anymore. Fall River, as much as they've gone through, still identify with neighborhoods. In New Bedford, where are you from? North End. That's a huge tract of land in Fall River, away from Maple Terrace, up to Flint, Row. I mean, so based on that, what do you think?
Well, I think one thing that has changed is that the downtown is now a destination for a lot of kids, a lot of younger people. That wasn't the case when we were working. The way I look at it, we sort of established the foundation, for historic preservation. The vision back in the late 70s, early 80s was that the downtown would be restored. There would be commercial on the first floor, and you'd have residences on the upper floors. And guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. But we didn't realize it was going to be because of art, because of the school coming downtown. I'll never forget. It was probably I don't know, a year after the school opened. I was walking down Acushnet Avenue and I saw a couple of gals walking ahead of me. One had purple hair, one had green hair. I thought to myself, this is going to work. Art in downtown is going to happen because they were just walking around freely, and it's so. I think the downtown's transformation is going to have a lot to do with the city moving forward, and it's just wonderful to hear my daughter talk about, gee, Dad, we went to this restaurant and we went to that thing, and the place was crowded. There's people all over the place. That was not the case back when we were working for the city.
Mhm.
And that's a wonderful change. And it had a lot to do with just the surveys of historic buildings that you guys did, the money that was put into streets and sidewalks and lighting. And people finally got the idea that historic preservation was a good thing to do, a profitable thing to do. When they first established that district, there was a lot of hesitancy. There were people who said, you can't tell us what to do with our property. We'll do whatever we want. But when they started to see how preservation would upgrade the property, that's when that whole movement took hold. And it was at the right place at the right time for when the Star Store was converted to UMass and the Fine Arts Department moved in. There was just something there. There was a tipping point for the downtown. Now the city's challenge is to have tipping points in other districts, in other neighborhoods, as you have suggested. And that's I think that's a much harder thing to do, because you're dealing with a lot more properties, you're dealing with a lot more people who are like, as you said, absentee owner. One would hope that there would be some sort of a mortgage program available for a middle class owner who can take charge of a 3-decker or 6-decker. I think what's happening with the investors, they're looking at what happened in Southie and other parts of Boston, where these 3-deckers are now, $1 million condos each floor. And they're saying, well, we can make this happen, but I don't think that's going to happen in New Bedford. I think there is going to be some alteration of the housing market because of the rail, but I'm not so sure that's going to happen in necessarily in the South End or the West End per se. I think you might see something closer to the rail stops for that real estate dynamic to take place.
Well, it's already starting, from what I've been told, of the Church Street station, which is just being staged now. I mean, at least, there's piles of gravel, there's rails, there's, all kinds of stuff in there. But I've been told that area of Church Street, the prices on the real estate have continuously gone up.
Oh yeah, that's
So
going to happen.
the biggest problem is going to be gentrification. And part of the problem is okay, and that's, we were talking about Portugal, same thing. The English and the Irish, found that they could live in Portugal. It's a very friendly country. It's a very nice country. The food is incredible. I mean, the rail is very good. I mean, what's not to like, right?
Right.
But when you're used to paying these low prices, and you feel like, I can't give this guy $50 a month for rent. I'll give him 100. And it, how that goes. The next guy goes, give you 100. It's like, right. So next Irish guy comes up to your next door neighbor's like, how much you want for your house? $100 a month. Yeah, €100, right? So yeah, all that's going to go up. And then, the artists, it seems like there's this phenomenon, I guess. I don't know how long this is going on, maybe even with Soho and all those other places. The artists come in, they're living hand to mouth, crap buildings. The owners barely keep the thing from catching fire.
Right.
I'm converting it to studios. Then it's commerce. People start coming in now. Like the Star Store, I remember the very beginning, they didn't think it was going to work because there was amenities. There was no conveniences downtown. So it's like, this is
right.
How am I going to live here when I've got to go to the mall or to a strip mall or to up on Rockdale Avenue to get anything? And then slowly,
right.
that started to happen.
It changed.
It changed, yeah. So the gentrification gets dangerous because now speculators will come in and say, hey, you know. So I remember when I ran my own advertising agency, I was the agency of record for the New Bedford Seafood Co-op. And I'll never forget a national fisherman seeing the headline in the photograph, the last fishing boat leaves the port of Salem.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, talk about a famous
Yeah.
port with clipper ships, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we had that was a problem that my friend Mike Daigle and I, when we were working for Tony, he tasked us with going down, and we were only allowed to save 10 historically significant buildings into what was going to be the Route 18 South.
Uh-huh.
And that was tough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess they thought they'd just clean up all that mess and stuff like that. And, we try to photograph some of the buildings and people would be standing outside and they'd be freaking out. Like, we don't know if they were illegal or if they were doing illicit things or whatever. But, and then they basically cut the city from its own waterfront. I remember I came back from the University of Miami. I was like, how the hell do I get on the docks? I've been going there since I was a kid with my stepfather, So many things have happened. Now we are reconnected to the dock. Now it's a boulevard. And I was at a charrette when Mayor Bullard, the first month that he was in office, he did these charrettes. And I remember George Rogers was still pounding on burying Route 18.
Yeah. The tunnel concept.
Yeah. And so there were a bunch of engineers there and like, oh, this is insane. It's, I said, okay, so how about if we just ignore it? So what do you think we're here for? I said, no, you understand. How fast do you go on a highway? Well, back then it was 55 because of the fuel.
Yeah.
55. Well, how fast do you go on a boulevard? 35. Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
Just change the name.
Yeah.
So 35 years later, because I remember one of the engineers went, oh my God, we can put rattle strips, as traffic is coming in, we can put some soft scaping and so on and so forth. But it took 35 years to get that done. And now look at it. And that was all created by city labor, right?
That's correct. I mean, we took a shot at redoing the foot of Union Street to try to get more access. So in some ways that was good. In most of the ways it was, fair to failing. And I guess it was Mayor Tierney who said, we got to do a better job. And she got the city engineering department involved, and they did a grand redesign of the foot of Union Street, and they extended it to, reimagining Route 18. And I think they did a hell of a job.
Yeah.
It works a lot better. Of course, it took years and it took a lot of money, an infrastructure improvement that was needed drastically.
Yeah. I mean, it looks gorgeous now.
Yeah. I mean, John and I were very friendly, and we always talked about trying to connect the downtown with the waterfront. We had a working waterfront. We didn't have Disneyland waterfront. This was a real waterfront. So we did a waterfront park. At first, we had the overpass that was part of the settlement between Whale and the city and urban renewal people, which was okay, but ultimately it was not the answer. But it was an improvement. And the whole idea of connecting downtown to the waterfront, we tried to use the Moby Dick Trail. We tried to reinvigorate that to bring people down. Mm-hmm. And, these fits and starts were, they were all right, but look what finally happened. I mean, what the solution now, I think, is as good as you're going to get. And it's a good, and there are people, on that waterfront. It's not just fishing, but you have folks going out for dining. You have people, the tourists walking around. They can live together. At first, the fishermen didn't think they could live with any kind of commercial development. There was a lot of reaction against trying to do something like that. So it's sort of the imagination. What can you imagine? What can you accomplish to reach that goal? And I just think, I look back at the city when I started as city planner and what it is today, that especially, the downtown, just the imaginations were running wild back then. And guess what? Over 40 years, a lot of progress has been made. Now we're going to start imagining new things for neighborhoods. And how is that going to be achieved?
Right.
And
neighborhoods can't be demarcated by a master planner. They have to be demarcated by the people who live there, because I don't know if you remember growing up in New Bedford, where as a kid, I mean, you'd be like a 9-year-old kid, you could practically on your bike, being totally unharmed. I mean, the only danger was that you were stupid and darted out in front of a car and got hit by a car, but you could go on your bike with your buddies all over the place. I mean, you can live in the South End and go downtown, but you also knew, for some bizarre reason, where the parameters of your neighborhood were.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I don't know, maybe part of that, I'm thinking of Lund's Corner, Ball's Corner, Tucket Hill, all the trolley stops, pretty much delineated. Clifford Chapel, all those places pretty much delineated the neighborhoods. And another thing that reinvigorates my mind is having lived in Portugal, where seriously, in one block, okay, and there are 10 storefronts, and those 10 storefronts, 6 of them are cafes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Food.
And they're all, and then in noontime, because that's the big meal of the day in Portugal, it's standing room only. People are waiting to get into each one of these establishments. Going back in time, think back in time. I mean, I lived on Earl Street when I was a kid, right across from DeBras Oil, between North and the Avenue. And even then, there was this demarcation. If you lived if you lived below North Front, it'd be like, well, if you lived from North Front to Acushnet Avenue, it's a little bit better. If you lived on Acushnet Avenue to Ashley Boulevard, oh, you're doing pretty good. If you lived on Ashley Boulevard and above, it's like, whoa, your old man must make a lot of money, right? And so, it was kind of interesting that, because I'll never forget the Kennedy assassination. For some reason, all those storefronts are even more buried in my mind. Going up on Acushnet Avenue, there were all these mom and pops on the first floors, the ground levels rather, and owner, a lot of them were owner occupied. The owner of the hardware store on Colette and Acushnet Avenue was also a tenant, the first floor tenant, well, second floor technically, and then he had an income producing or family, renters, and it worked. I mean, my God, there was Richard Shoes, there was Pilda's Market for the fruits and vegetables. The Golden Key. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a delivery boy, because the bike with a big basket, because I used to see the old boys, the old ladies would give them like 50 cents, for a tip, right? Like, wow, that's a great job. And Mr. Pepin, who was the butcher at the Golden Key. And it was like all these places, the Chinese restaurant that was on, I always get it screwed up between David and Davis. I'm dyslexic. Davis Street is North End, David Street is South End.
Right.
All right. So there was a Chinese restaurant there. And again, you could go all the way up to Frem's Jewelry, the Capitol Theater, Poisson's Jewelers, where my mother traded. Oh my God. Sonia's, no, it wasn't Sonia's Pharmacy. There's Poyant Shoes. There was Poyant's Pharmacy too, right? There were like several pharmacies where you could coffee frat for like 25 cents. And a hot dog for another 25 cents. But anyway, the point being is that you never actually had to walk anywhere. And if you had to go someplace like downtown, you take the bus. It's just having to take a car to drive like a mile to get a quart of milk is crazy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how I don't know how art collaboratives can help with that concept of reestablishing neighborhoods. I wonder about whether that can take place. You have different galleries in different parts of the city. They're going to be able to engender enough interest to generate some energy about a particular neighborhood. I don't know. I wonder about that.
Oh,
Kilburn Mill was nothing really until the Whaling Museum went in there with the Panorama. Talk about the impact.
you were
of
involved
art.
with that, right? Were you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Carolyn both involved. She did some painting. I did some poetry on that. But that mill, the Whaling Museum put that mill on the map, pretty much. Nobody really knew where the
Except for
Kilburn.
Furniture City.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Yeah, Furniture City package pricing.
Like when they said Kilburn Mill, I said, "Where the hell is that?" And Caroline, I think that's Furniture City. But anyway, we went in there, and what the museum did to that floor space where they had the panorama was just spectacular. It cut both ways because I guess the cheap rent that certain artists were paying was hiked considerably after the museum, picked up their materials and left. But there, you've established a center of artistry and God knows what else is going on in that building. And will that revitalize that area or bring people into that area that have different views and different ideas? I would hope so.
Well, one of the problems that New Bedford's always had, and they can't help it, it's very similar to Florida. New Bedford is a peninsula city, just like Florida is a peninsula state. Plus, they got a panhandle to make it worse. So it's actually right angle peninsulas, right? In a sense. And because of that, you really have to want to get something into Bedford to drive from out of town into the city to get it. Because it's a terminal city. And people are like, oh, why are you using such a negative term? It's a terminal city. You get down to Cox Point, you got to turn around and go back. Okay. Mm-hmm. Fall River is a crossroads city, geographically stationed where 4 of the major state routes run through Fall River.
Right.
And people are like, what's that got to do with anything? Well, it has a lot to do with anything. Because again, you're driving, for example, Cape Maine in New Jersey. Okay, if you've ever screwed up between the Garden State Thruway and the New Jersey Turnpike, you end up going down towards Cape Maine, you ain't coming back. That's until you hit there, or you try to get one of those cut throughs from the state police and hope to God you could, avoid it. And so, case in point, Luis Villanueva from Colo Colo on Center Street was told that he had to vacate the premises suddenly by the landlord. The sale came out of the blue. So he's like, what do I do? I said, well, I was just been speaking with Larry, with Steve Lefkowitz from Furniture City. That's one of my dad's old accounts. He used to handle Steve and Larry's homes. My father was a janitorial contractor. And I knew Steve from NFIB, National Federation for Independent Business. And he's like, what do I do? My brother wants me to sell the furniture store. He said, I think I could still eke out a living. And I said, well, there's a couple of artists you've got in here. He said, yeah, they're all right. They got no place to go. And we started talking. I said, well, why don't you contact the city and see if they can make some sidewalk improvements, okay? And you could probably put out the word that you'll build a suit for studios and so on and so forth. Well, I told Luis this. He got in contact with Larry, and then Luis calls me back and says, to Steve rather, and he calls me back and he goes, Ron, it's unbelievable. I went down there. He's a very nice man. He said, what do you want? I said, well, no, what do you want? Well, I like that. Yeah, no problem. So that's when he moved his gallery. The problem is, it was the gallery, as much as everybody loved the shows that Luis put on Center Street, was a destination. So you had to go down to the gallery. Still it's the South End kind of vibe,
Yeah.
And it's like, it's an old building. Yeah, don't know. And so what else are you going to do when you get out of there? Well, you're going to go to Me and Ed's or something? That was about the only other thing that was down there.
Yeah.
Davies Locker, all those places. I mean, don't forget the South End in our lifetime went from where the poor farm was, it was almost like a colony of the city,
Yeah.
summer colony, very underdeveloped, and except for the periphery, you know, around the edges. And then the Portuguese fishermen, you know, were making out quite well. They started developing properties and blah, 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 blah. You know, so it went from a French Canadian neighborhood that pretty much stopped at Hazelwood Park, where the second city hall was at community pharmacy on South Water Street, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as a Cove Street, right?
Yeah.
On that intersection there. And so anyway, the point being is that whoever was going to go down there was going to have to put on a dog and pony show and a half. Well, unfortunately, Steve came down with cancer. This family, the Murrays, I believe they're in the equipment rental business. Jim Murray, the current owner, bought the place.
Uh-huh.
His wife is an art aficionado. Somebody referred to her as an art nut, which was a very, you know, they considered a good term. And they've been going through all these manifestations. Now they've become a venue. You know, the Panorama, yes, put them on the map.
Yeah.
And now they've got rooftop dining, weddings, the completion of the Hurricane Dike. I like to call it promenade. I think it's a lot more.
That's the better way to call it. Yes.
Yeah.
Much. And who could have thought of that? Like when we were working, the Hurricane Dike, you know, that was sort of like a blight on the city. We knew why it was there, but it was kind of a crazy, rat infested. Nobody wanted to go there. If you went there, it was dangerous. Now, you know, everybody goes there because of what the Army Corps did with the top of that place. Again, imagination and bringing imagination to reality. I mean, that's really a spectacular walk.
Well,
either way.
The other thing too is, if I may use the very unprofessional term, it takes balls.
Yeah.
Somebody had to have the balls to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I lived on Mott Street on right across from the Cornell Dubilia. And I saw that dike, you know, from our back porch, a little, you know, because it's blocked off by two other buildings. I saw that section of wall being built stone by stone. And I also remember going, you know, with the rest of my friends to the Beetle house where the Beetle cat was born in that. And unfortunately, that was scheduled for, they didn't bother. I mean, that was a historic home. And it's a parking lot now.
Yeah, terrible.
On the other side of the gate. And then Palmer Scott Boatyard, which became Billy Woods Wharf. Palmer Scott was another one of my dad's clients. He was like a foremost marine architect. Mm-hmm. So all those things started to happen, but it was like we had all these puzzle pieces that nobody ever could envision.
Yeah.
The picture.
Yeah.
You know, bringing it down to art. We talked about the first two legs, you know, the Swain School of Art. And oddly enough, the College of Visual Performing Art. Okay. Mm-hmm. What do you think the third leg is going to be? I mean, the railroad might be a platform, but I don't think it's going to be a leg. You know, we have a museum, yes, but we have how many surveys? There were like 7 national, international surveys, most creative city, 2017. When did you retire?
2012.
Okay, I think 2017 is the most creative city in the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
And there is not one standing commercial gallery, art gallery in the city.
Yeah. That's tragic. And I think it's going to be difficult to reestablish after this pandemic, because there's going to be a lot of hesitancy to take the plunge, you know, economically, risk trying to do something like that.
Well, the gallery model has changed drastically in a lot of ways. It's always been evolving. I mean, you know, the big famous galleries from New York, a lot of people don't remember. They start off in Saatchi and Mary Boone. They start off in their living rooms.
Uh-huh.
Where all their, you know, their influential, financed friends would come over, and they would, you know, it was like a thing. Oh, this is Richard Walega. He's an artist, and you know, here's his work, and and that's how it evolved. But here in the city, just in Patch Street alone, there's 65 artists. I don't know how many there are now in Kilburn, and then all the ones scattered in between, the rope walk, and a couple of other places. And in fact, we need a census of the artists.
Yeah.
But a majority of them are selling their work. And I keep going back to this 80-20 thing, this Venn diagram. 80% of the sales that are being made are from the furthest away. They're not from in town.
Uh-huh.
The artists during the pandemic that had no gallery representation, and they were lucky they sold a little painting or something, a couple $100 every couple of years. They're the ones that all of a sudden started getting solicited online through Facebook, whatever, commissions. Hey, how much you want for that? And they were doing well. I don't know, they're the ones who had the gallery representation were crying in their beer because their galleries are shuttered. They didn't change to the online kind of thing. Online is still a wonky kind of a thing. Our generation doesn't feel comfortable buying something of, that much money without looking at it. Where the millennials and the following generations have lived on screen all their lives, and they don't have a problem with it. But the problem with online sales is that money is leaving town. That's the point from a political, governmental thing, is that money is leaving town.
Yep. I'm not sure what the answer is, really. I think we just have to keep preserving, the things that make New Bedford unique. Our connection with the water, our connection with the surrounding open space, both within and outside of the city. I mean, the what you would call the metropolitan or greater New Bedford area is replete with wonderful land owned in public trust by a number of nonprofits. Those have to continue to be encouraged and assisted where you can. And within the city, you got Whale and
let's not forget the national park. We totally forgot about that.
Yeah, well, that was a moment as well, sort of the stepping stone to getting downtown and making the way for the Star Store to have its impact. But I think art's always going to play a big role in New Bedford. There's a whole list of noted artists that came from this area, and I think it's going to continue. It's part of the city's heritage, and there are enough artists in town that are aware of that heritage that they're going to keep moving forward with it. How it plays out in terms of gallery space and neighborhood revitalization, who can really predict that? I don't pretend to have that crystal ball, but you were talking about how certain galleries started in somebody's living room or whatever. That might happen because there's so much wonderful residential space, and as you said, you got these 3-deckers that can really, with creative approaches, these places can really be renovated and become very livable and comfortable residences. So that there's hopefully that interplay between the unique kind of residents we have, plus the folks who are visionary and artistic. If you have one or two of those become successful, people are going to, they're going to try to replicate that in different areas. So that's hopefully some of those ripples will be having an effect on the city, especially as rail comes in and people have more access to the opportunities that are available, in the region. But art certainly is a key part of the city, and I think it's going to be instrumental in doing something positive for the city in the future. There's no doubt.
Yeah, you just actually lit up a corner of my mind, because it's okay. It was whaling, it was textiles. Now textiles evolved from whaling. It was the same thing, the share system, where you had multiple investors in one building, one operation, blah 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 blah. And then we went to apparel, because apparel came off the textile. Okay,
Yep.
and we were, a lot of people don't understand this. This was an apparel center. You would have to go to Women's Wear Daily or one of those places and
Yep.
speak to the editorial staff about in Bedford. My mother was a sample maker for some of the biggest houses in New York.
Yeah, they were making labels for everybody.
Yeah,
Every
yeah. Remember Chemise Lacoste?
Yeah.
Down on Riverside. I mean, that's another one of my dad's accounts. Geez, he had a lot of accounts. But anyway, so now art, it's not that crazy, because now the artists are coming out of that mill space.
Yeah.
So it really is, it is organic. It is connected.
It's ironic when I forget the name of the mill, but the one that was down on Belleville Avenue, and they knocked it down.
Oh my God, there were so many of them where Arlen's used to be,
Yeah.
Brook Street Apartments.
But what the rationale was, this mill is worth more demolished, taking the timber and the brick, than it is keeping it intact. Well, that's not necessarily the case anymore. I mean, if we had known then what we know now, maybe some of those mills would have been preserved. Look at all of the conversion of mills to residential space.
What they said was impossible. When you were working for the city, they said those are going to be fire bombs.
Yeah,
right?
And when I went into one of them, I was gobsmacked. Like, you got to be kidding me!
Yeah.
And they knew that there was that kind of a market, that kind of for that kind of space.
Yeah.
And so, again, if you're from New Bedford, you don't have that vision. If you come from out of town, you'll take a look and say, "Oh my God, what can I?" And they're right near the rail.
Yeah.
I mean, everything was in place for them to convert. So, some of these mills that went down, it's tragic. They weren't, as it turns out, they weren't as valuable demolished as they would have been intact, because of all the different things that done with them.
Again, one of the biggest things was, you can't do anything with it. I mean, those things were able to sustain 100 pounds per square foot, which was like phenomenal, because I mean, the equipment that you could put on those places. So then there was this thing, about the linseed oil.
Right.
They were using linseed oil to keep the dust, the textile dust down, blah, blah, blah. It's all seeped into the cracks. I don't know if it was the guys from Montreal, the Steen, the Stern family. They're like pharmacy, like the biggest pharmacy chain in Canada at the time, took over the Holland mills. And they poured concrete over those floors, which now totally sealed off the quality of those things, there's been a lot, going on. And I still think that, like you said, we're still in that growth stage. We haven't hit the pinnacle yet. And truthfully, you don't want to really hit that pinnacle, because, it's down both ways, you got to keep, going up. Do you ever think that we'll have, I hate to use the word trolley, because, that conjures up a lot of other things, but public transportation that is energy efficient, environmentally friendly, inexpensive?
I think so. But, the emphasis in Washington is to go electric, and I think that's going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of investment in that, and I think your regional transportation authorities are going to convert, because it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be more efficient. I think that's going to happen. I'm not sure when, but I think that's a pretty good prediction.
I predict maybe in 20 years, and the autonomous
probably.
vehicle, the concept of the private autonomous vehicle is going to completely, if those scooters they've got, nobody owns that thing except the company owns it. You don't own it. You got your credit card or whatever, boom, you're on it. And then, if you want to go, let's use the old trolley stuff. You want to go to Lund's Corner from wherever you are, Well,
Yeah.
you plug it in and this thing takes you and gets in line with all the other autonomous cars, which are almost like a trolley idea. And so they're following specific routes.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's
I
possible.
wanted to go back to one thing you mentioned. You talked about when Bullard was first elected and he had a charrette.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to me that maybe all of the artists in New Bedford ought to have a charrette about New Bedford and what their ideas might be. There's going to be some wild ideas. There's going to be some crazy ideas, but there's going to be some ideas that might make some sense. And the other thing is you got all this money coming down for infrastructure and for local government, state and local government. I mean, I think now's the time to try to get some ideas together and see what might make sense in terms of some investment in neighborhood development, and have the artists, sit them down and talk. I mean, it's going to be wild, but there's going to be some good stuff. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I think that's worthwhile. I think that's very worthwhile.
I mean, we just remember, I don't know, for some reason, the French Canadians are like, but in our generation, in the 50s, weren't really considered like immigrants because they were from Canada, for Pete's sakes. They're just up there, right? But the Portuguese certainly were. So that was a major one. And you did have the Polish. For some reason, they were like on Ashley Boulevard. They did pretty well, obviously. So you had the Polish. So that was like the major groups. Right? People keep talking about immigrants. And then, the Hispanics. Well, Hispanic is like, which country are you talking about? Which hemisphere? Because they cover the globe, right? So now you have this new batch of immigrants that are coming in. You see these people on bicycles, and people are like, oh, look at them, the poor people. Well, in their country, the guy with a bicycle is a rich guy, basically, because, and plus, you don't need a car. Everything is within biking distance or walking distance, right? So the point is that they are the future of the city. You're talking about the three-deckers. I mean, Dorchester, I think it must have been just when I was working for Tony's, was just around the late 70s, early 80s. Somebody in Dorchester figured out, I can buy this freaking three-decker for like $20,000, turn it into a duplex condo, right?
Yeah.
They were getting $250,000 back then, which was like huge money. $250,000 in 1979, 1980 was like huge money.
Yeah.
So there are ways of doing it. Plus, that takes extra pressure off the streets, and that's also been another thing. The automobile has really been the bane of our existence in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it has. You're right. Especially in New Bedford, where you have such narrow streets.
Oh, you want narrow? Go to Europe.
Yeah.
Like one car wide, if you're lucky,
They were narrow enough that Lewis Mumford made some comments about the narrow streets in New Bedford. So, I mean, and every winter, you all know what that means. You can't get around because they can't plow. But you're right.
At least Weld Street, because before my father built his house on Luke Street, we lived on the corner of Weldon County. When it snowed, they would close off from Mount Pleasant, where Holy Name was, all the way to County Street. No cars were allowed, but talk about sledding.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Of course, if you burst through those sand bales, you're pretty much screwed. To wrap this up, I mean, you're pretty much walking history. You've been there, you witnessed it, and you were even involved in some of it. You talked about, the fact that art is the next, or is the big industry now, because it supports so many people. But I'm still kind of curious. It's like the fishing industry, because again, there's another parallel. When I worked with John Bullard, because he was hired by the New Bedford Seafood Co-op, I think this is in between him becoming a mayor or after he was mayor. Yeah, or he became mayor. He became mayor afterwards. It was before he was mayor. And the point is that I remember saying at a meeting, "Where's the money going?" Okay. Well, this is I forgot the numbers now. I do remember that Red Lobster, as much as people hated them because they ran them out of town when they came into Dartmouth, Red Lobster, I think, was buying $19 million alone from the docks off of New Bedford. So the
Really?
entire, but where's that money?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, where do you see? I mean, it all went to the suburbs,
Hmm.
to God's country. That's what it was. The money was never quite reinvested back in here. So
Yeah.
I'm asking the same questions about art.
Yeah. I don't have that answer. I mean, I just, my experience has been that you've got to have pretty lofty goals. And I've seen a couple of those. I've seen, what's happened to downtown. It was a lofty goal to preserve that and enhance it. And it took 40 or 50 years, but it finally happened. And it happened in ways that we didn't quite imagine. The other big thing that I've seen in my life is the cleaning of the Acushnet River. And it's certainly not pristine, but I can remember, because we lived right on the river up near River's End and Acushnet.
Mm.
It was a sewer. And now in that part of the river, 50 years later, with all the investment and all of the national and local goals for clean fish, you've got swan, you got all kinds of water life in that part of the river. Not 100% clean, but it's very clean, and it's a testament to a lot of people, a lot of bureaucrats and a lot of public officials, including Bullitt, who lost his political career because of trying to clean Buzzards Bay, and the treatment. And look what happened to the treatment plant. The Fort Tabor is now a destination of for music festivals and things like that. And you've got the walkways that run down the south end. I mean, these are things that nobody envisioned would happen. But
when I worked there, the sewage treatment plant was right there. I mean, you can see it from the top of the fort, the parapet, and it was like not very pleasant. Yeah.
Not at all. So, but what was the right thing to do politically? It wasn't the right thing for John, but it was the right thing. And look at all of the spinoff. So I think you have to have big plans. You have to have major goals. And that's why I think, it'd be nice to hear what the art community has to say about New Bedford and about the whole city, not just the downtown, different neighborhoods, the West End, South End, North End, what can be done. I mean, the first instance of public art that I remember was in the West End right after the riots, when they wanted to do the dedication to Malcolm X and Angela Davis. I mean, that was a very, very, very controversial thing that happened, and Carolyn was involved in that in a way.
Any images of that?
Now you have
any images?
I don't know. I don't know that she might have some. I don't have any. I haven't seen any.
That'd be great.
But you had that. Then 15, 20 years later, the Seaflower at the Federal Building, how that was just plopped in place, and everybody was like, what the heck is that?
That's a good word.
And yeah, and well, it was the GSA that did it. They had a public initiative with that building, and they put something there.
It's like trying to put an elephant in your bathroom. I mean, it was all about scale. Always has been about scale. You don't have enough room to get back away and look for it. So yeah.
And a Texas artist, and I've grown fond of it over time. I think it has a lot to say about the climate, about the ocean. But now you've got public art popping up everywhere. Murals everywhere. It's wonderful. And the next step is to get the artists together and talk.
That's an excellent
idea. Up with the artists of New Bedford and put that out there and see what people say. I think it's worthwhile.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. I think we covered a lot of ground in this conversation. Actually, we need to really come back again, because I always tell people, it's not a one and done. You're invited to come back, and definitely based on a couple of things you told me, have it investigated, and then I'll invite you to come back and go from that point onwards. It'd be great if Carol
Sure.
could find those images.
Yeah. Tell her.
Yeah,
She might
I
be
mean,
able
I
to.
remember those days. That was not pleasant at all. Not pleasant at all. So, before I wrap this up, I'm going to ask you one of those Barbara Walters questions. If you were a tree, what kind of a tree would you be? No. How would you like to be remembered? I asked this of artists, but I mean, you were an integral part or integral part.
That I left the city better than I found it. That I left public housing better than I found it. And I truly believe that's the case. And that makes me, to me, that's the definition of success. I don't need to have big memorials or anything. I know in my heart that I did things that made the city better, that are still there, that make the city better. And I was also in public housing for a while, and I know that
Well, you took a lot of hits in that.
Improved the housing stuff.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
You took a lot of hits. I mean, anybody who's going to be in public housing is going to take hits from one side or another.
But we renovated every project in that portfolio over the 19 years that I was there running that part of the housing authority.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I'd like to be remembered. I found it. I improved it. It's better than when I started.
And it's still improving.
And hopefully, there's still something to be done. If I can light some fires and get people thinking about New Bedford, that would be good.
Great. Fantastic.
But this has been.
What's that?
And I said this has been enjoyable, and I'll tell Carolyn to find those pictures if she has them.
All right. Yeah. It'd be great to see Carolyn find those pictures, and just to get her on here as well, because the history. I mean, I've been very privileged to be able to sit in the seat and speak to all these people and listen to all these things, and there's still much more to learn. But got to wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier again. Thanks so much to our guest, Richard Walega, for being with us today. And we'll see you next time. But remember, think wisely, follow instructions until we're through this pandemic, and be kind to each other. Once again, Ron Fortier for the South Coast Artist Index. Thanks. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.